Sunday school, she gave us a chance to meet the other children in Independence. I met a very beautiful little lady with lovely blue eyes and the prettiest golden curls I've ever seen. We went through Sunday school, grade school, high school, and we're still going along hand in hand. She was my sweetheart and ideal when I was a little boy, and she still is.
In 1890, a young man from Independence fell in love. What transpired over the next 7 decades may be one of the sweetest love stories ever.
June 22nd, 1911. Dear Bessie, speaking of diamonds, would you wear a solitaire on your left hand should I get it? I've always had a sneaking notion that someday maybe I'd amount to something. You may not have guessed it, but I've been crazy about you ever since we went to Sunday school together. But I never had the nerve to think you'd even look at me. I don't think so now, but I can't keep from telling you what I think of you. More than sincerely, Harry. July 12, 1911. Dear Bessie, you know that you turn me down so easy that I'm almost happy anyway. Very sincerely, Harry.
By 1913, Bess decided she had fallen in love with the persistent farmer who continued courting his sweetheart with a shower of letters. As Harry left for duties during World War I, Bess sent her picture along with a note.
Dear Harry, you didn't expect me in Fort Sill so soon, did you? I'm depending on this to take you to France and back, all safe and sound. Bess.
November 24th, 1917. Dear Bess, I got your picture last night, and I've had such a wide smile ever since that everyone has remarked about it. It is sure a speaking likeness, and I really can't tell you how glad I am to have it. Unless you come yourself, you could have sent me nothing that I'd like better. Yours, Harry. November 11th, 1918. You evidently did some very excellent work as a Liberty Bond saleswoman, because I saw in the Stars and Stripes where some 22 million people bought them and that they were oversubscribed by $1 billion, which is some stunt for you to have helped pull off. Here's hoping to see you soon. Yours always, Harry.
March 11th, 1919. Dear Harry, I'll be just about ready alrighty when you come, and then we can settle the last details. May said Mr. Morgan had a job waiting for you, and if you should decide to put in part of your time there, you'll have another home waiting for you in Independence, for nothing would please Mother any better. Loads of love, devotedly, Bess.
On the next Kansas City Crossroads, the Truman love story continues after World War I. I'm Bill Kalahurka. Harry Truman was 6 years old when he found his true love in Sunday school. Her name was Bess. From that moment on, he idolized her, and perhaps he expressed that best through the letters he wrote to her.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. We pick up the Truman love story at the end of World War I, when Harry came home to Bess. On June 28, 1919, soon after his return from the war, Harry and Bess were married here at the Trinity Episcopal Church in Independence, just a few blocks east of Bess's house. Their daughter Margaret was born in 1924.
As Harry's political career soared, he and Bess once again put pen to paper and added a few more chapters to their love story.
June 28, 1935. Dear Bess, this is the day 16 years ago that I made a plunge and took a chance for which I have been a better man. Kiss Margie. Love to you, Harry. July 28, 1939. Dear Bess, I succeeded in getting a real rail bill agreed to and on the Senate calendar yesterday. It regulates subsidiaries and holding companies of railroads. Kiss Margie. Love to you, Harry. June 6th, 1945. Dear Bess, it won't be long until I can sit back and study the whole picture and tell them what is to be done in each department. When things come to that stage, there'll be no more to this job than there was to running Jackson County, and not any more worry. Lots of love, Harry.
June 28, 1948. Dear Bess, 29 years. It seems like 29 days. Detroit, Port Huron, a farm sale, the Blackstone Hotel, a shirt store, county judge, a defeat, Margie, Automobile Club membership drive, presiding judge, senator, vice president, now. You still are on the pedestal where I placed you that day in Sunday school, 1890. What an old fool I am. HST.
But Harry Truman was anything but a fool. During the course of their lifelong love affair, Harry wrote Bess more than 1,300 letters, a testimony that love at first sight can last forever. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Built to last, a term thrown around so much today it's lost some of its meaning, or at least maybe some of its longevity. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. If you believe that few things nowadays are truly built to last, we'd like to show you a genuine exception today on Kansas City Crossroads, at a place where a group of 32 craftsmen and artists intersect with the raw materials of wood and metal. The result is a creation that will literally last for centuries, and a sound that goes on forever.
Since 1919, the people inside this 5-story building in Lawrence have been erecting monuments to sound. Reuter pipe organs fill churches and universities all over the country with a joyful noise. The men and women who create these towering musical instruments invest thousands of hours in each one, assembling tens of thousands of individual pieces, all working in harmony. These pipe organs aren't built as much as they are born. Listen to its voice and you can't help but be moved. Each instrument is very much a living, breathing thing. Craftsmen like Gilbert Stone are the proud parents. Patient, nurturing, honing their crafts over decades of time. With the exception of an improved technique here and there, the organ makers at Reuter craft their instruments by hand, just as it was done more than 75 years ago. Machines can't replace the human touch, the feel for the sound. Something these pipe organ makers know in their hearts will endure for many generations to come. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. In the old westerns, dusty cowboy hats made movie stars look larger than life. But for a real cowboy, his hat was more than just a prop. It was his key to survival.
I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Regardless of where you found cowboys, on the big screen or on trails to the west, one man is responsible for bringing style and function to what they wore on their heads. His name, John B. Stetson.
In the mid-1800s, brave men and women set out for new opportunities in the West, and John B. Stetson was one of them.
John B. Stetson grew up in a family in Philadelphia that made felt hats for years. He learned the art of felting from his father. Due to health reasons, he had to head west and get to a different climate. And so he settled in this particular St. Joseph, northwest Missouri area.
At a crossroads in his life, he left Missouri and joined the California Gold Rush.
John B. Stetson, on his trek west, ran into a cattle baron who was wearing an old hide for a head covering. He saw the hat made out of felt that John B. was wearing, offered to buy it from him. At that point, John B. would not sell it, so he made him one. Then he sold it to him, and thus became the sale of the first John B. Stetson hat.
It was that $5 gold piece that launched one of the greatest manufacturing companies of the 19th century. And since John B. Stetson's gold fever didn't pan out, he set his sights on the hat business.
The Boss of the Plains hat primarily was the first #1 hat in the Western industry. That's the one that John B. Stetson created for the cattle barons and the people that were heading west, which at that point in time was anything west of the Missouri. They use these hats not only for self-protection, but sometimes for survival, both for themselves or for catching water, raindrops and so forth, for survival of their animals.
John B. Stetson found his gold mine in something much bigger than little yellow nuggets. He went back home to Philadelphia and eventually opened up a factory because the hat orders were pouring in.
Legend has it that the Stetson, as well as just hats in general, became a means of status. And depending on the type of hat that a man wore, in some cases women also, depending on whether they were wealthy, whether they were accepted, whether they were just a down-and-out cowboy and needed something on his head.
Today, the Stetson name is back in St. Joseph. The Stetson factory produces over 1,500 hats a day, much the same way the factories produced the hats back in the early days of John B. Stetson.
But the hat that was worth a $5 gold piece to the cattlemen on the Western Plains can now run you up to $3,500. The price you pay for over 100 years of nostalgia. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
In the 1850s, the Missouri River wasn't much different than it is today, considered to be too thick to drink and too thin to plow. It was a big muddy monster that's eating habits included a healthy diet of steamboats. 289 steamboats, in fact, from St. Louis to Pierre, South Dakota. And while almost all of those boats were either destroyed or are still buried at the bottom of the river, one steamboat has floated to the surface of history, thanks to changing currents, a curious farmer, and a determined team of treasure hunters.
I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we find the steamboat Arabia in many ways exactly the way it was left on September 5th, 1856, when its hull came to a crossroads with a walnut tree snag.
A side-wheeler built in 1853, the steamboat Arabia measured 171 feet long and 54 feet wide. It was a floating community carrying people and their entire lives down the river. There were even 2 prefabricated homes on board. The 1850s was the golden era of steamboats, and the levee at Kansas City, which was at that time the town of Kansas, was a major destination. But on this autumn evening in 1856, the steamboat Arabia was on its way to Omaha, Nebraska, with 222 tons of cargo and 130 passengers, mostly women with children traveling to meet their husbands. They had just left the town of Kansas and were near Parkville when it happened.
The boat ran right into a tree, stuck in the mud, below the surface of the water. The pilot didn't see the log. It began to fill with water. The pilot knew he had a problem, so he turned his wheel, headed for shore, but they never arrived. The boat sank some distance from shore. The water went to the upper decks, and the people rushed as high as they could on the boat. Now, they did have a lifeboat there, and a little at a time, the passengers were put aboard this lifeboat and carried to shore into safety. And there they stood on the bank, huddled in these bushes and among the trees, and looking out across the river. They saw the boat sink, and there was nothing they could do to save their cargo, their personal belongings, all that they carried west with them.
The Arabia was gone forever. At least, so they thought. Over the next century, she would be buried deep by mud, silt, and water. But over time, the river changed course, and the Arabia would no longer be at the bottom of the Missouri River, but under a cornfield near Parkville. Treasure hunters tried to dig down to the steamboat Arabia as early as 1877, but it wasn't until 1988 that a group of men from Independence performed a large-scale excavation. What they found was a time capsule of life in the 1850s.
It's almost like finding a dinosaur bone, something that has never been seen before. We've never seen a steamboat from that time period. We've seen pictures of them.
Crews worked day and night for weeks digging to the steamboat Arabia. On the next Kansas City Crossroads, the modern-day treasure hunt continues in this Kansas cornfield. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. The 1850s was the golden era of steamboats, but the mighty Missouri was a perilous path to the west. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, the continuing story of the steamboat Arabia, a ship lost on September 5th, 1856, when a walnut tree snag sunk it in a matter of minutes. We rejoin the adventure of the steamboat Arabia as the modern-day treasure hunters dig their way through 45 feet of mud to finally reach the cargo, 200 tons of it, under a Kansas cornfield. There it had rested since the Arabia sank with 130 passengers on board. All the passengers reached the shore safely, but the cargo was thought to be lost forever, until the tenacious crew from Independence succeeded where other treasure hunters had failed. The thrill of discovery yielded hundreds of crates and barrels, a time capsule of life on the American frontier.
Uncovering this boat was like going back in time and spending our days uncovering and unloading a steamboat that had once been loaded in St. Louis 132 years earlier, and finding the boxes of the passengers and the supplies that they sent west.
Family and friends worked side by side, washing away more than a century of silt.
We found dishes that were incredibly well preserved, still wrapped in straw, coming from England, from the factories where they were made, and shipped overseas, and arrived in the United States, only to be lost in this boat.
Recovery of the cargo continued for 4 months, with each day like Christmas Day. Treasures included bolts of cloth, tools, clothing, hats and boots, shiny buttons, rustic guns, everything an 1856 family might need for life in the West. But alas, all the whiskey barrels reported to be on board had already washed away.
When the boat sank, it was supposed to have been carrying, among everything else, 400 barrels of the finest Kentucky bourbon that money could buy in those days. They thought it was worth $1 million.
The 200 tons of recovered treasure is the largest collection of pre-Civil War goods.
Of course, we all had our favorite things. But my favorite were the food items. The bottles of blueberries that were still blue, and cherries that were still red. But to find food products that you could still eat before the Civil War was an incredible thing to find.
Originally, the crew had planned to sell all the cargo to help cover the cost of the dig. Instead, they devised a way to share their discovery, and these modern-day treasure hunters became museum curators, learning the time-consuming art of restoration.
To think that there are sunken ships in Missouri and in Kansas, well, there really are. And it's a real thrill to go out and have the opportunity to go back into history and find the records of these ships and these boats that traveled and wonder what the cargo would be. And it may not be gold and emeralds and gold doubloons, but it would be other things. The Steamboat Arabia, a story about the spirit of adventure, dreams and determination and buried treasure. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Long before traffic jams on I-35, people hopped on streetcars to get to work, to school, or to the movies. And no one worried about finding a parking place.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we'll take a ride down memory lane, to a time when Kansas Cityans moved down this path and around the city in familiar yellow streetcars, what some people called a bunch of bananas.
Kansas City jumped on the idea of a street rail system clear back in 1869, when the common mode of transportation was a single car pulled by a pair of horses or mules. It went 5 miles an hour and saved travelers a 4-mile walk to Westport. By the turn of the century, cable cars built in England carried thousands of people each day up and down the city's hilly streets. For a 2-cent fare, some Kansas Cityans could get quite a thrill on their way to work. The 9th Street incline from Quality Hill to the West Bottoms was steep enough to rival anything in San Francisco. The municipal transportation system grew so rapidly that nearly 2,000 streetcar operators were needed to move all the passengers. Tunnels were added to lessen some of the steepest routes. Lines extended to Independence, Kansas City, Kansas, St. Joe, and later the Plaza and Waldo.
At one time, we had 32 streetcar lines here, just up into the late 40s, and about 700 streetcars.
Hundreds of streetcars carried more than 250,000 fares each day.
My favorite line was Swope Park. It'd take about 3 hours to make a trip from one end to the other, and you only had to make 3 trips, and you'd be done. Whereas on Troost or Country Club or some of them lines, you'd have to make 5 or 6 trips downtown. But it was very pleasant running that Swope Park. You'd get over there and run down Grand Avenue and Main, and the city was bustling then in those days, you know.
Streetcars served virtually every neighborhood in the city during the course of 8 decades, careening back and forth through the lives of generations of Kansas Cityans.
J-cars across right in the middle of the street. Traffic had to stop when they had stopped. That was kind of a nuisance for a lot of people. I think the government boundaries had to come off.
The streetcar operators switched to the rubber-tired, go-anywhere buses we know today.
After the war, of course, everybody bought cars. And that took a lot of people off the streetcar and the buses.
Old 779 braked for the last time at 75th and Warnell on June 23, 1957. The end of our streetcars marked the end of an era when people traveled around the city together, forming a close-knit community. People courted and fell in love on the streetcars and waved at Santa, who spread holiday wishes along the streetcar routes. Listen for that familiar streetcar bell ringing through our memories. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Her name is Connie, and those who know her truly love her. But this isn't an ordinary love story, because Connie isn't an ordinary object of affection. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Connie is a Lockheed Super G Constellation propeller airplane, a very unromantic name for an airplane that an entire generation of Kansas Cityans became very romantic about.
Everybody knows what a Connie is. Outside of the girl's name, it's the only airplane ever called a Connie, and it's stuck. That's kind of short for Constellation. That became a short, lovable term that everybody applies to it, and it's stuck.
Connie was born in 1946 to the Trans World Airline fleet. She was the best of the best.
The majority of their fleet at that time was Constellation because that was the biggest, fastest airliner in the world at the time.
In the 1940s, aviation history was at a crossroads. Before the Connie, no other airliner had taken commercial passengers across the Atlantic.
856 Constellations were built by Lockheed in Burbank,